he put his hand on my leg and he was talking to me and talking to my mom, and he says, she has acute myeloid leukemia. If we don't treat it right now, she's not going to make it. And I remember I asked him, I'm not going to make it to what? And he goes, to the end of the week. I can honestly say it took years for this to set in that this is what's going on. My name is Renee. I'm from California. I'm a single mom and I love the ocean. I love hiking. I'm very artistic and creative, and I like to find careers that allow me to utilize that creativity. And I'm really kind of obsessed with my kid. She is incredible and she's very smart. So when did my first symptoms start? So I was a senior in high school. I was a cheerleader and a dancer. So I was covered in bruises all the time and always achy. And, that was normal per cheerleading. And then I went and got my wisdom teeth pulled. And I had a perfectly fine surgery, but after the surgery, things went downhill really, really fast. And I ended up being rushed to the hospital by my mom, who insisted that there was something wrong. And they did some blood work and told us, at the time, don't go very far. You're not being admitted yet, but we're going to get the results fairly soon. So, just stay close by. And they found me and my mom, and they said, you need to come with us. We need to take you back to do more testing, but we need to get you back to the hospital. And they brought me back in and took me to this little tiny little room and said, we don't know what's going on just yet, but because you're 18, we need to ask you if you have a DNR. And explained to me that because I was 18 and that I was really sick, that I had two options: to either sign off my rights to my parents and be completely admitted to the hospital with complete unknown circumstances and let my family make decisions and choices on my behalf because I was going downhill very quickly, or stay in pediatrics and make my own decisions and sign a DNR. And I panicked, didn't really know how to respond to that, and immediately signed my rights to my parents. And then the rest was a big blur. It was the same day that I went to the hospital for that blood test. It was that night. This sweet old man walks in and he says, he put his hand on my leg and he was talking to me and talking to my mom, and he says, she has acute myeloid leukemia. And my mom, I remember, laid across my hospital bed and said, no, she doesn't. You have the wrong test results. Her sister just got over mono. She has mono. And he picked her up and he said, no, it's not mono. It's really serious. And if we don't treat it right now, she's not going to make it. And I remember I asked him, I'm not going to make it to what? And he goes, to the end of the week. And it honestly took I I can honestly say it took years for this to set in, that this is what's going on, because anybody that I had ever known who had cancer, they died, and kids don't die from this, you're not supposed to. I'm supposed to go do things. From that moment on, I spent about 7 months in the hospital. um, I was immediately in ICU, hanging to life. They told me at the time of my diagnosis that I had less than a 25% chance of making it through the night, let alone the week. That I was going to need 2 platelet transfusions and 2 blood transfusions right then and there, just to get me stabilized. And that if I made it through the week, there was a 50% chance that none of the treatments would work. But if they did work, there would be a 50% chance of developing a secondary cancer. And if that wasn't enough, then they told me that if I continued to go along with the treatments that they had designed, I would be completely infertile. And I hadn't even gotten my driver's license or my high school diploma yet. And everything was just ripped away. So a month later, I graduated high school in intensive care unit on speakerphone. My sisters accepted my diploma from me, and that was that. So I had a PICC line put into my chest, and I was started on a 7-day drip chemotherapy treatment. After the chemo was finished, we found out that the chemo did nothing but piss off the cancer. So then they put a PICC line on my neck right here. And by that time, I was in intensive care. They started me on another chemotherapy, a stronger one. I believe it was doxorubicin, because that's what basically wiped it out. And I was in intensive care. I was completely comatose. And I had about 4 or 5 IV pulls, with all the things connected to them and everything. I think the last round was like a week's worth of chemotherapy in like 24 hours. It was insane. And I remember I had mucositis. I threw up my esophageal lining. It was a mess. And then after that was finished, they were like, okay, we got to do radiation. And they had me do total body radiation. So I stood in like this photo booth looking thing, and they had to tape me in there because I was really weak, but I had to stand up. And so I'm standing in this machine thingy. It looks like a photo booth, and they would zap me the front, and then I'd come back later, and they would do the back, and then I had to do it 3 times a day, front, back, front. And then the next day would be back, front, back. And so it was like that for like a week. And then I had to do a separate radiation treatment, a lower dose on just my lungs. So then after that treatment, then it was finally preparing me for, it was basically wiping out my immune system, cleaning out my bone marrow to basically kill it, so that I was completely immunocompromised. I was in double door isolation for months. I couldn't have visitors, I couldn't see my friends. And all of my friends are off in college now and living their dream, and I'm in prison in the hospital. And so after that, then they prepared me for my bone marrow transplant, which was the easiest thing out of everything. Lucky for me, I have 3 sisters, and 2 of them matched me perfectly for a bone marrow transplant, which is incredible because I'm mixed race. I'm Mexican and Italian. So they hooked it up to my IV. My sister was in recovery for a couple of hours. I ate cheese puffs and watched Monsters Inc. for the millionth time on a lot of Benadryl and morphine. And the following day after the infusion, they tested my they did bone marrow biopsy to see how much of my sisters had, come in and if it had taken and everything. And from day one, it was good to go. And it immediately multiplied, and then from that point on, it was just kind of monitoring to make sure that I developed a little bit of graft versus host, but not enough to cross the threshold of safety. So then I was allowed to leave the hospital, but because I was still so fragile, I had to be within 1 mile of the hospital for any situation. So I ended up having a successful bone marrow transplant. I had graft versus host disease and spent about 3 months at the Ronald McDonald House in Palo Alto. And then I was home and immune compromised and neutropenic for about a year. And so I was in complete isolation for a year. And at that time, honestly, I was at a really low point in my life. They said that as of, I think, day 2 or day 3, when they tested my bone marrow, it had shown like 85% my sister, and there was no percentage of me. So as far as acute myeloid leukemia is concerned, I was in remission. The chances of developing AML a second time were there, but not any more of a concern than developing a secondary cancer. And that was something that they had told me about from the very, very beginning, that the treatment that I have to have does cause other cancers, and that because of my, my ethnicity, I'm already, on the cusp of some of these other health issues like heart disease and, diabetes, things like that. And so the protocol was basically to continue monitoring me as if I still actively had cancer. And so they outlined like a 5-year regimen of, I had to go get all of my vaccinations all over again, but I had a certain time frame when I was supposed to do all of those. And then at the same time, I had a lot of radiation done to my, body. I had serious wounds and scar tissue, and radiation and scar tissue and cancer just love to group up. So there was the concern of tumors, but we don't want to expose you to more radiation and do mammograms when you're 22. So it was just ultrasounds and and regular checks, and we've been monitoring my blood work for the last 20 years, every 3 to 6 months, depending on what it looks like. I have chronic anemia, and my immune system is not my age. I'm 38. My immune system is only 20 years old. And so that meant going back to work was really difficult, because anywhere I worked, I instantly got sick. And I had all of my chronic issues from the leukemia already burdening. But, now I have a sensitive immune system, and, it was 2002. So not a lot of people really understood, that. And so I lost a lot of jobs because my health was so fragile, and it made me look like I wasn't a consistent employee, so it was, the ripple effects are still felt, both emotionally and physically and financially. And I can honestly say that I didn't start to cope and deal with my leukemia until I got breast cancer. I packed it away. You know, I didn't know where to go to cope with it. I didn't know where to go. So when I got diagnosed with breast cancer, it was kind of like, you know, it was a sucker punch, but at the same time, I kind of knew what to do this time.